In the far reaches of the Libyan desert, where the horizon bends like molten air and the silence feels older than time, there lies a sea of glass. It glitters faintly beneath the sun, not with the shimmer of water, but with something harder, stranger fragments of yellow crystal scattered across the sand like the remains of a dream that caught fire. Each piece is smooth yet scarred, translucent yet opaque, as though it remembers the violence that birthed it. Travelers who stumble upon this place say it feels unreal, as if they've walked into a mirage that refuses to fade. For centuries, the desert kept its secret. The Bedouins who crossed it sometimes carried small chunks of the strange glass as curiosities or charms, believing it to be the tears of a sun god who once wept upon the earth. But it wasn't until the 1930 seconds that Western explorers truly saw it not as myth, but as mystery. They called it Libyan desert glass, and even then, no one could explain how such purity, such heat, could have existed here. There were no volcanoes nearby, no lava, no evidence of human craftsmanship, only silence, and the impossible glitter of fused sand. To hold a piece of it is to hold contradiction lighter than expected, yet uncomfortably warm even in the shade. Its color shifts with the light, from pale honey to deep amber, glowing as if the sun were still trapped within. Under magnification, tiny bubbles and veins run through its body like captured breath. It is beautiful, yes, but unsettling like the aftermath of something that should not have happened. Scientists came, each certain they could read its story. Some claimed it was the child of a volcano, birthed in a blast of molten fury, but the desert has no volcanoes. Others said it was lightning, a bolt so powerful it melted the dunes. Yet lightning strikes leave narrow trails, not fields stretching for hundreds of kilometers. A few suggested a meteor impact, a collision of worlds that turned sand to liquid fire, but even that theory failed its own proof. No crater exists, no scar marks the place where heaven met earth. Only the glass remains, and the silence that guards it. Imagine the moment it happened. If it happened, the air shattering into flame, dunes liquefying in an instant, the sky folding inward with light brighter than any dawn. The sand melting, swirling, hardening again before the echo faded. A storm so fierce that it erased itself, leaving only beauty as evidence. Standing here, it is easy to believe that this land remembers. The wind carries a dry hiss, as if it whispers the language of heat long vanished. Even the dunes seem to glow with memory. The mystery defies reason, and that is what draws the curious closer. It's not only the question of how, but the deeper one of why. Why does the earth, so vast and indifferent, preserve this one wound so delicately? Why keep these golden remnants of fire where no river, no rain, no hand has touched them for thousands of years? It feels almost intentional, as though something wanted to be remembered, but only in fragments. And so, the Libyan desert becomes more than a landscape. It becomes a riddle carved by light. The explorers returned with sacks of glass, their jeeps weighted by what they could not explain. In laboratories far from the sand, they heated samples, crushed them, measured their purity. The verdict was always the same: temperatures beyond comprehension, conditions no ordinary earthly event could replicate. Yet the desert had done it once, quietly, completely, and left no trace of how. Under the moon, the dunes look frozen mid-motion, each ripple glinting faintly like the surface of an ancient sea. Perhaps that is what it once was, not water, but a tide of fire. A sea that burned, then cooled, and in its cooling turned to glass. A reminder that the line between creation and destruction is thin as dust. Tonight, the desert sleeps. But the glass beneath the sand still glows faintly in the starlight, as if remembering the day it was born. Somewhere in its silence, the earth keeps a memory too violent to speak a secret fused into crystal. And if we listen closely enough, beneath the wind and the centuries, we might still hear the echo of what once burned. When the tomb of Tutankhamun was opened in 1922, the air that escaped was more than stale. It was ancient, heavy with centuries of silence. Every artifact within seemed carved from eternity itself. Gold shimmered beneath torchlight, blue lapis winked from amulets, and in the center of it all, resting over the boy king's heart, was something far stranger than all the treasure combined: a small scarab, carved not from jade or emerald, but from a yellow stone that seemed to hold sunlight inside it. It was no ordinary gem. Its glow was softer than gold, yet deeper than crystal, the kind of color that made the eyes linger, as if the stone remembered light differently than other things. For years, no one questioned what it was. It was enough that it belonged to a pharaoh, and that it shone. But when scientists finally examined it, they realized it was not a gemstone at all. It was Libyan desert glass, the same impossible material scattered across the Sahara, born from a fire fierce enough to melt the earth. And so, the mystery widened. How did this fragment of a cosmic furnace find its way into the burial of Egypt's most fragile god-king? The glass had been shaped into the image of a scarab beetle, the sacred emblem of rebirth. To the Egyptians, the scarab was not merely an insect. It was a symbol of the sun's journey, the small divine creature that rolled the disk of dawn across the sky. The scarab was life's persistence, the promise that darkness would always yield to light. But in Tutankhamun's jewel, that promise carried a paradox. The sunstone resting over his heart had not been born of gentle light, but of annihilation. They called it the Stone of Ra, believing it to be a shard of the sun itself, fallen from the heavens and solidified in the desert. Perhaps they were not entirely wrong. The priests who prepared the young king's burial would have recognized its hue, the golden fire of the dawn. They may have seen it as divine evidence, a piece of the god that had touched the earth. To place it upon the pharaoh's chest was to bind him to eternity, to anchor his soul to the celestial fire from which all life sprang. But beneath that faith, another truth glimmers. The scarab's origin was violence, a force so great that it could erase landscapes. It was beauty born from ruin, light born from impact. In that contradiction lies the heart of the story, how civilizations dress disaster in gold and call it sacred. The Egyptians, in their wisdom or superstition, wore the memory of cataclysm as protection, perhaps hoping that by owning it, they could control it. The jewel is small, barely the size of a child's palm, yet its history stretches beyond kings. When light passes through it, the stone seems to breathe. It pulses with warmth, as though remembering its birth. To the archaeologists who studied it, the realization was unsettling. The same material that glittered on the pharaoh's chest had once been molten sand, born from a fireball so intense that no living thing could have survived it. Tutankhamun, the child of divine lineage, carried over his heart a piece of the apocalypse. It's tempting to imagine the artisans who shaped it. Did they know where it came from? Did they sense its strangeness when their tools touched it, that this was not of earth alone? Perhaps they carved it with reverence, perhaps with fear. The object is both fragile and eternal, a paradox trapped in stone. It is the touch point between two kinds of knowledge, the spiritual and the scientific, the mythic and the measurable. When Howard Carter lifted that jewel from the tomb, he could not have known he was holding the answer to a question older than Egypt itself. What happens when the heavens strike the earth? The pharaoh's jewel, resting in darkness for 3,000 years, carried the memory of that answer, wordless, radiant, and patient. The desert had turned to glass. The glass had turned to a god's adornment, and somewhere in that transformation, the boundary between destruction and divinity disappeared. Perhaps the Egyptians were right. Perhaps it was the Stone of Ra, not a gift from the sun, but a warning from it. And if that warning was carved into gold and carried to eternity, what then could have burned the sands of Egypt into stars? Science, like faith, begins with awe, and in the case of Libyan desert glass, it began with disbelief. How could a desert burn without smoke? How could sand melt without flame? The questions haunted geologists for nearly a century, each hypothesis flickering briefly before collapsing under its own heat. The first theory was the simplest: meteor impact. A rock from the heavens, heavy and merciless, slamming into the earth with a force that turned dunes into liquid. It made sense until they went looking. There was no crater, no basin, no scar, just endless desert, flat and flawless, as though whatever struck had burned not downward, but outward, or perhaps never struck at all. Others spoke of comets, those fragile ghosts of ice and dust that wander between planets. A comet, they said, could explode before touching the ground, an airburst so violent it could vaporize the sand beneath it. In 1908, such a blast flattened a forest in Siberia, an event now known as Tunguska. Could something like that have happened here, thousands of years before writing, before witness? Yet even that theory shivered under scrutiny. A comet's fire leaves chemical fingerprints, traces of carbon, iridium, ash, but the desert glass is pure, almost impossibly so. Whatever melted this land burned cleaner than any natural flame. Lightning was next. Not the kind that flickers and vanishes, but bolts so fierce they might last for minutes, striking the same ground again and again until it fused. On smaller scales, lightning does create fulgurites, twisted glass tubes buried in sand. But even the angriest storm could not have produced a field of glass stretching hundreds of kilometers. The energy required would be apocalyptic, not weather, but something greater pretending to be it. And so the scientists stood before their instruments like priests before an altar, faced with a phenomenon that refused to explain itself. The data were precise, the mystery absolute. The glass had formed at temperatures near 2000 degrees Celsius, hotter than any known volcanic eruption, hotter than steel in a forge, yet it occurred in one of the coldest geological contexts on Earth. The contradiction glimmered like the glass itself, mocking every chart and measurement. Some began to whisper about cosmic heat, the kind that comes from beyond comprehension. One astronomer wrote, almost poetically, that perhaps the desert was once kissed by a star. It was an unscientific sentence, and yet truer than any formula. The evidence pointed toward a heat no human could endure, no civilization could remember, and no planet could easily explain. What kind of fire leaves no ashes, only memory turned to glass? Perhaps it was something we no longer have a name for, an event so ancient it predated myth. Maybe the Egyptians were not wrong to see the glass as divine, for its birth defies everything that defines earthly fire. It burned once, utterly, and then disappeared, leaving silence so deep that even time hesitated. Today, the samples of Libyan desert glass rest behind museum glass of their own, imprisoned reflections of the same mystery. Scientists still peer at them under sterile light, searching for a past written in chemistry. Yet beneath every explanation lies unease, the feeling that this was not a single event, but a reminder, a whisper from the cosmos that our world, so solid and certain, is still soft enough to melt. And if it happened once, could it happen again? The desert does not answer. It only glows quietly, endlessly, as if remembering a fire that came from nowhere and left everything changed. There are moments in Earth's history so violent that they erase their own witnesses. The desert remembers one of them, not in fossils or bones, but in glass. Imagine it. A morning like any other, thousands of years ago, the horizon trembling under heat. The dunes stretched endless and gold, the air shimmering in stillness. And then, without warning, the sky tore open. Far above the earth, a comet fragment perhaps the size of a house, perhaps larger, entered the atmosphere at unimaginable speed. Friction ignited it before it could fall. The air itself screamed. For a moment, it burned brighter than the surface of the sun. Shadows vanished, colors died, and the desert bloomed into white fire. It did not strike the ground. It detonated in the sky. An explosion so vast that it flattened everything beneath it, turning silence into vibration, sand into light. The force would have been apocalyptic. Temperatures soared beyond 2000 degrees in an instant. Wind came next, faster than sound, dense as stone. It scoured the desert clean. Every living thing within hundreds of kilometers ceased to exist. No time to run, no time to understand. In less than a heartbeat, the dunes melted. The surface of the earth flowed like water, rippling under a storm of invisible flame. Even the horizon bent, as if gravity itself recoiled from what was happening. From above, it might have looked almost beautiful. A flower of fire blooming over the land, petals of molten air expanding outward. For a few seconds, the earth glowed. Then, as suddenly as it began, the light withdrew. The silence returned, but it was a different silence now, one that hummed faintly, as if the air still remembered. Beneath it lay a new desert, crystallized and alien. The sand had become liquid glass, frozen mid-motion, its ripples caught forever in the moment of its own destruction. No crater remained. The comet had never touched the ground. Its fire lived and died in the sky. What it left behind was not ruin, but transformation, a scar too vast to see, too delicate to name. The dunes cooled slowly, their molten surfaces hardening into glass. For days, perhaps weeks, the desert shimmered with trapped heat, glowing faintly beneath the night. Then the winds returned, patient and blind, and began to cover the evidence grain by grain. Thousands of years later, only the glass remained fragments of a moment when heaven had touched earth, not with mercy, but with fire. The same fire that would one day be carved into a pharaoh's jewel, mistaken for a gift from the sun. But this was no gift. It was a warning written in light. Standing there today, it's hard to imagine such violence. The glass gleams softly, whispering nothing of the storm that created it. Yet each piece holds the memory atomic scars, rippled textures, tiny spheres trapped inside where air once boiled. Scientists can still feel it in the data, the mark of heat too pure to belong to the earth alone. And if you close your eyes in that desert, you can almost hear it, the faint hiss of sand liquefying, the heartbeat of the planet pausing. What was destroyed was not just a landscape, but a boundary. The line between the celestial and the terrestrial, the divine and the mortal, blurred for one impossible instant. Then the sky closed, as if nothing had happened. The winds returned. The world slept again. But beneath the sand, beneath centuries of forgetting, the glass still burns with quiet testimony. It tells of a time when the heavens descended not in myth, but in heat, and left the earth both wounded and illuminated. And somewhere, deep within that silence, the question lingers like ash that refuses to cool. If the fire came from the sky, who was left to remember? Long before the desert was mapped, before names or borders, people walked these sands. They carried water, herded animals, followed stars that never lied. To them, the desert was not empty, it was alive, sacred, full of voices that came from wind and stone. And somewhere within those ancient generations, a memory was born, one so terrible, so luminous, that it survived not in writing, but in story. Across North Africa, old Bedouin tribes still speak of the day the sun descended. Their elders tell it softly, as if the words themselves could still burn. The story goes that the sky tore open without warning, and a second sun appeared blinding, roaring, alive. It hovered above the horizon and screamed like a dying god. The earth turned white beneath it, and when it vanished, nothing grew for a long time. Even the wind, they say, forgot how to move. Archaeologists often dismiss such tales as metaphor, echoes of the countless suns that rise and set over the dunes. But the details resist dismissal. In the oases of western Egypt, cave drawings show spirals descending from the sky, men shielding their eyes, herds scattering. In the highlands of Libya, petroglyphs depict fire raining in lines, as though the heavens were bleeding light. In Mesopotamian tablets, written 1,000 miles away, a line reads, "The day Shamash fell, and men became shadows." These are fragments, scattered across centuries, yet they hum with the same rhythm, the language of awe. Were these stories the world's first disaster reports? Imagine the survivors, small groups, wandering the smoking edges of the event, stunned and blind from the light. To them, the sky itself had turned against them. How could they not speak of gods? A comet's airburst would have appeared as divine punishment, a moment when creation folded back upon itself. The survivors may have lived in fear of another dawn. The myths that followed of fiery serpents, of suns that fell, of gods who descended and vanished could all be the long shadows of that one instant. It is tempting to separate myth from fact, to believe that science lives on one side and story on the other. But in the deep past, they were one and the same. Myth was how memory survived catastrophe. It carried truth, not in detail, but in emotion, the echo of what it felt like to see the impossible. The people who fled that desert fire might not have had words for comet or airburst, but they knew what they saw, the heavens descending, the ground melting, the end of what they understood as world. Even the Egyptians, millennia later, preserved traces of that vision. Their hymns to Ra speak of a time when the sun walked among men, when divine fire cleansed the earth. The god was both creator and destroyer, light and annihilation. What if these myths were not born from imagination, but from inheritance, a memory passed through blood and language, reshaped into religion? To the early desert dwellers, the fire must have seemed eternal. But like all storms, it passed, leaving silence so vast it demanded meaning. In that silence, gods were born. Perhaps the first deities were not creators, but explanations, attempts to name what had been seen. The ancestors of myth may have been the witnesses of fire, their terror crystallized into worship. And so, across centuries, the story softened. The burning sky became allegory, The sound of impact became thunder in scripture. What had once been seen became believed. The disaster turned into doctrine. And yet, hidden beneath the poetry and devotion, the trace of that single, unbearable day remains a day when the sun fell, and humanity learned how to remember through story. Were the first gods simply the survivors of the last disaster? The idea is almost too large to hold. But somewhere, under the same sands that birthed the Pharaoh's jewel, lie fragments of that fire, and fragments, too, of the human beings who saw it. If the myths remember the fire, what else might they have carried not as warning, but as inheritance? For decades, the desert kept its secret buried under silence until the microscopes came. Scientists, crouched over grains of sand smaller than the eye could see, began to notice something strange. Beneath the glassy dunes of western Egypt, the soil shimmered with tiny distortions, minerals twisted by forces beyond earthly scale. Under polarized light, the grains fractured into patterns of impossible geometry. These were not the marks of time or erosion. They were the scars of violence. They called it shocked quartz, a mineral transformed under pressures so immense they do not occur in any normal place on Earth. Only two forces can create it: nuclear explosion or cosmic impact. And there, under the sands, it appeared again and again, mingled with droplets of once molten silica, tiny pearls of glass frozen in the instant of their creation. Each grain was a microcosm of apocalypse, proof that something unimaginably powerful had once burned through this land. The Earth, it seemed, had recorded the catastrophe not in legend, but in lattice and crystal. The memory was atomic. Scientists traced isotopes, mapped magnetic anomalies, pieced together fragments invisible to the naked eye. They found rare minerals like zircon and lescher tellurite, formed only in the instant where heat meets annihilation. The temperatures required would have melted steel, shattered rock, and boiled the very air. And yet here they were, resting beneath a desert so quiet that even the wind seemed afraid to disturb it. One researcher described it as a fingerprint left by the sun. It was not metaphor, the physics were real. The event had released more heat than any volcano, any lightning storm, any man-made fire. It was, quite literally, a solar moment on Earth, a brief imitation of the sun's own violence. And when it passed, it left behind not ruins, but testimony. What is remarkable is not just that the evidence exists, but that it does not fit neatly into any narrative. Every piece of data confirms the event, yet no theory explains it completely. There is no crater, no ash layer, no boundary of extinction. Only perfection in the glass, silence in the record, and a question that lingers like smoke without flame. The impact was real, but the impactor, the comet, the star, the fragment of heaven has vanished without trace. So the scientists continue to collect what the Earth remembers: particles, pressures, patterns. Each one is a letter in a language older than writing. Together they tell a story of unbearable heat, of matter unmade and remade in a single breath. And yet, for all our instruments, for all our equations, we remain outsiders to the event, like archaeologists, excavating a memory that does not belong to us. There is beauty in that irony. Humanity can detect the very heartbeat of the apocalypse, but not its name. We can hold the fragments of the sun in our hands, yet never see the moment it fell. The desert knows, but it will not tell. It offers only its shimmering surface, the gleam of glass against endless gold, a mirror to our curiosity and our forgetting. The Earth remembers what we have forgotten, etched not in words, but in atoms. And somewhere in that memory lies the first great story of creation. How fire fell from the sky, how it remade the world, and how, in its light, humanity learned to see gods where there had once been only stars. Long before the first historian set ink to clay, humanity spoke in symbols. The night sky was not a map then, but a mouth whispering to those who listened. When the ancients looked upward, they did not see stars of gas and fusion. They saw the memories of fire. Myths were the first language of survival, stories built to remember what could not be endured directly. And though time has scattered their words like sand, the echoes still reach us faint but clear enough to stir recognition. In the old Sumerian tablets, there is a tale of Utu, the blazing god who fell to earth. He came wrapped in light so fierce that the rivers boiled and the sky bled gold. The scribes wrote that the sun was broken and scattered across the land, leaving the ground glittering as if with fragments of its skin. Archaeologists call it metaphor. But beneath the poetry, one can feel something more: the pulse of a witnessed event, translated through awe. In Egypt, similar whispers flow through the hymns of Ra, the god who sailed across the heavens in his burning bark. The priests said that once, long ago, he descended to punish humankind for forgetting their place. His fire rained upon the desert, melting the world into glass. Then, weary of his wrath, he withdrew, leaving behind relics of his light. The scarab carved from Libyan desert glass, placed over the heart of a boy king, may have been more than ornament. It could have been the crystallized memory of that descent, worn as a shield against repetition. Further east, along the Sinai and into the Levant, nomadic songs speak of the day the mountain burned without flame, a fire that came from no hearth, no lightning, no human hand. It illuminated the horizon and left a silence so deep that people mistook it for the voice of the divine. Generations later, the stories became scripture. The burning bush, the pillar of fire, the mountain wrapped in smoke, symbols of communication between heaven and earth. But perhaps they were more literal than we imagine. Perhaps the first prophets were those who watched the sky open and felt creation unmake itself for an instant. To modern eyes, these tales read like invention, yet their patterns align too neatly, their imagery too precise. Across deserts and millennia, civilizations that never met each other spoke of the same catastrophe: a fire that fell, a sun that descended, a god who punished and withdrew. Myth becomes less a dream and more a record written in a different dialect of truth. Science and myth were not enemies in the ancient world. They were the same act, the naming of the unexplainable. When the ground turned to glass, when beasts vanished, and the air trembled with light, the witnesses reached for meaning. The event was too vast to describe in measures or numbers, so they shaped it into gods. Every myth that followed carried a fragment of that original astonishment, the attempt to humanize what was beyond endurance. And maybe that is what myth truly is. Not lies, but translations. Each story a coded report, each god a metaphor for something the people once saw, but could not survive describing plainly. The fire of the heavens that destroyed cities, the river of light that scorched the land. These are not the inventions of priests. They are the poetry of witnesses. Even today, when satellites orbit the Earth and telescopes peer into galaxies, we still use the same instinct. We tell stories to frame what frightens us: nuclear fire, falling stars, the vast silence of space. Myth is not the opposite of science, it is its ancestor. What if every god of fire was a memory not of heaven, but of something that fell from it? The question lingers like a shadow across the centuries. The ancients tried to explain what had burned them. We, with our instruments and data, try to explain what still burns within us, that haunting recognition that the stories were never just stories. And so the language of myth becomes the first archive of disaster, a code carved into the human spirit itself. When we learn to read it, we are no longer just studying the past, we are remembering it. From these stories of divine fire will rise another, the story of those who built their worlds upon the ashes it left behind. In the long shadow of the burning age, humanity began to watch the sky differently. The heavens had once been a source of warmth, of life, of promise, but after the fire, it became something else, a place to fear. The survivors no longer looked upward with wonder, they looked with vigilance. Somewhere above, the gods still burned, and perhaps one day they would fall again. From this fear, religion was born not as faith, but as memory in disguise. In ancient Egypt, the first astronomer priests emerged from this silence, standing upon the stone thresholds of the horizon, where night and dawn met in fragile balance. They raised polished instruments of copper and stone, tracking the sun's rebirth each morning as though confirming that the world still existed. The temples they built were not only places of prayer, they were observatories, aligned so precisely that the sun's light pierced hidden corridors for only a few moments each year. These alignments were not coincidence. They were warnings written in architecture. The sky must be watched, its rhythms recorded, its temper appeased. Every dawn, priests of Ra climbed to the temple roofs, eyes shaded against the glare, reciting hymns that were as much calculation as devotion. They measured shadows, traced the movement of stars along the desert's rim, recorded the shifting pulse of the solstice. To them, the sunrise was not guaranteed, it was earned. The rituals that surrounded it were less worship than reassurance, as though by remembering the sun's name, they could keep it from falling again. On the walls of Edfu and Heliopolis, inscriptions describe the rebirth of the sun after it fell into chaos. The texts speak of a great light that once consumed heaven and earth, and how the gods rebuilt order from its ashes. The priests called this renewal Zep-Tepi, the first time, the moment creation began anew. Yet read through a different lens, those words sound less like myth and more like memory. A civilization remembering the day the sky burned, then rose again. Even the Great Pyramids, aligned with uncanny precision to the cardinal points and to the belt of Orion, may have been instruments of remembrance. The shafts, leading from the king's chamber, point directly toward the ancient stars of rebirth and destruction. The priests believed the pharaoh's soul would ascend along these pathways to join the sun. But perhaps they were also measurements, celestial insurance policies, tracking the heavens for the return of catastrophe. The solar cult of Egypt was not built merely on reverence, it was built on anxiety. The festivals of Ra and Atum, the offerings at dawn and dusk, the endless repetition of ritual chants, all were forms of observation disguised as faith. Every prayer doubled as data. Every alignment was a calculation. The gods were not appeased through worship alone. They were stabilized through precision. One could say that the first scientists were priests, terrified of the past. They studied the sky not to understand it, but to prevent it from repeating itself. Their calendars were survival devices, their temples instruments of memory. They were the guardians of continuity, ensuring that the universe remained predictable, that the cycle of light and darkness held steady. And if one day the sun burned too bright or the stars fell from alignment, they would be the first to know and the first to warn. Imagine the weight of that task. To believe that through vigilance alone, one might keep creation from unraveling. The priests stood each dawn at the world's fragile border, speaking ancient formulas into the wind, as if their words themselves held the sky in place. Perhaps they did for millennia. Egypt endured, bound together by that rhythm of observation and prayer. What if the first calendars weren't made to tell time, but to prevent the end of it? The question lingers, unsettling in its beauty. Civilization began not with curiosity, but with caution. Humanity learned to measure because it had once been measured, weighed, and nearly burned away beneath a falling sun. The temples still stand, their corridors filled with light that arrives on schedule, obedient as ever. But somewhere within their geometry lies the original fear, the memory of when the heavens descended, and the priests of the horizon began their watch. Faith had preserved the memory. Now, science would rediscover it. There is a moment in every civilization when fear becomes ritual, when what once terrified is tamed through repetition, through symbol, through the gentle choreography of memory. In the temples of the ancient world, the fire was never allowed to die. Priests carried it from altar to altar, feeding it with sacred oils and whispered names. To the uninitiated, it was devotion. But to those who remembered, it was something older, an act of preservation, a promise to never forget the day the world burned. Each flame flickering against the dark walls of Egypt, of Sumer, of Babylon, was a miniature sun, a reminder that the heavens had once fallen, that divine fire had touched the earth and left its mark. Humanity, unable to command the true fire of the gods, built smaller versions, fires they could contain, fires that obeyed. In doing so, they turned terror into faith. Every candle was a treaty between man and memory. The transformation was subtle, almost tender. The same fire that once scoured deserts now glowed softly in sanctuaries. The same light that melted stone now warmed the faces of worshippers. What had been destruction became comfort. What had been wrath became blessing. In that shift, the first true religion was born not as worship, but as remembrance disguised as prayer. Across continents, the pattern repeated. Ziggurats rose like mountains of flame, their steps lined with braziers to call back the light. In Persia, the eternal fires of Ahura Mazda burned through centuries, tended by priests who claimed they guarded purity, but perhaps what they guarded was continuity. In Greece, the sacred flame of Hestia never went out. In Rome, the Vestal virgins were sworn to protect it with their lives. Civilizations rose and fell, but always there was a flame somewhere, flickering in the dark, echoing the first inferno that had scarred the earth. The fire had become the axis of meaning, a symbol both cosmic and intimate. It lit not only temples but hearths, processions, funerals, coronations. It marked beginnings and endings, births and deaths. To hold a flame was to hold history itself, condensed into light. Humanity had inherited the sun's memory and given it gentler form. The gods no longer needed to descend, their essence had been domesticated. Perhaps that was the hidden revolution not of swords or empires, but of comprehension. When the skies first fell, humanity was prey. When they lit their own fires, they became participants. In mastering flame, they reclaimed what had once annihilated them. The priests of the horizon no longer merely observed the heavens. They recreated them on earth, in chambers of stone, in rituals of light. And so, through the long corridors of time, fire became language. The prayers may have changed, but the gesture remained, a spark against the void, a fragile defiance of darkness. Even today, when a match flares in a quiet room, or a candle burns for the dead, we are repeating that ancient gesture, taming chaos into remembrance. The gods were not overthrown, they were absorbed. Their fire became ours. Perhaps the first religion was not worship, but memory disguised as prayer, the attempt to make peace with the impossible. Every temple flame was a story retold, every rising sun a reassurance that the world still turned, and beneath that gentle glow, a truth endured. What we fear most, we learn to sanctify. The age of divine fire faded, but its embers waited, buried in glass, in legend, in sand. And one day, thousands of years later, explorers would stumble upon its remnants once more, and the desert would remember how to shine. The desert has always hidden its secrets behind distance, vast, unyielding, and silent. In the early 1930 seconds, a team of British explorers crossed that silence in search of something no map could promise. They carried compasses, notebooks, and the arrogance of men who still believed the world could be fully known. Yet what they found in the Libyan desert defied every law of reason. They had come chasing rumours, fragments of reports from Bedouin traders who spoke of a valley of yellow stone that shimmered like water under the sun. To geologists, it sounded like a mirage. To archaeologists, a puzzle too tempting to ignore. So they set out from Cairo with their trucks and camels, following ancient caravan trails that dissolved into wind. Each day the horizon wavered, as though the earth itself resisted being measured. Their journals still survive, pages browned by heat, ink faded to the colour of dust. One entry, dated 1932, describes the first sighting. A glow upon the sand, as if dawn had spilled itself and failed to retreat. They thought it a trick of light, until one of them dismounted and lifted a shard the size of his hand, translucent, honey-coloured, sharp as obsidian. The sand beneath it glittered faintly. Then another piece, and another, until the dunes themselves seemed to breathe glass. They had stumbled upon the impossible, a desert that had melted and refrozen, stretching for hundreds of kilometres. The explorers collected samples, their excitement tempered by confusion. There were no volcanoes here, no mountains, no craters, only endless plains of silence. The expedition's leader, Patrick Clayton, noted how the glass was pure, flawless, as though made by the deliberate hand of nature's furnace. Yet no furnace had burned here in a million years. The sun rose each morning with blinding brilliance, turning the field of glass into a sea of molten gold. Standing upon it, the men felt as though they were trespassing on the ruins of another age. Their boots left no prints. The ground was too hard, too ancient. At night, they built campfires that reflected back from the dunes in eerie ripples, as if the desert itself still remembered the fire that had birthed it. One explorer wrote that he could not sleep for the sound. A faint, glassy whisper carried by the wind, like the echo of something cooling too slowly to die. The desert seemed alive, shimmering between beauty and menace. The men gathered samples, wrapped them carefully, and debated the impossible question: what could have created this? Theories circled, meteors, lightning, even volcanic storms, but none could explain the absence of impact, the perfection of the fusion. When their supplies dwindled, they turned back, leaving behind tire tracks that would vanish within days. Yet the mystery followed them home. The specimens they carried were sent to laboratories in London and Berlin, where scientists examined them under microscopes and flame. The verdict was unanimous. The glass was natural but unlike anything else on Earth. Its purity rivaled that of man-made quartz. Its temperature of formation exceeded that of any known terrestrial event. The explorers did not know it then, but they had walked across prehistory, a wound so old it had become landscape. What they called a discovery was, in truth, a return. The myths of fire and divine descent had led them here, through centuries of silence, to touch the residue of catastrophe. Science had finally retraced the footsteps of legend. What happens when the explorers of science retrace the footsteps of myth? Perhaps they find not answers, but reflections, stories written in matter, waiting for recognition. The desert, after all, does not lie. It only forgets slowly. When the men returned to civilization, their crates of strange glass caught the attention of scholars and dreamers alike. It would not be long before laboratories, telescopes, and restless minds began whispering the same question the priests once asked. What kind of fire could make the earth itself remember? When the crates of Libyan desert glass reached the laboratories of Europe, the mystery deepened instead of clearing. What the explorers had stumbled upon in the sands of Egypt now sat beneath microscopes and spectrometers, gleaming like frozen sunlight. Scientists expected to find impurities, bubbles, grit, some trace of the earthly processes that had shaped it. But what they saw instead was perfection, silica so pure it could have been engineered. The samples were transparent to a fault, with edges that cut through gloves and theories alike. At first, they assumed volcanic origin. But there were no volcanoes for thousands of kilometers, and the composition betrayed no trace of basalt or ash. Then came the temperature tests. The glass had formed at nearly 1,600 degrees Celsius, far beyond the threshold of any desert fire, higher even than molten lava. The technicians, accustomed to controlled furnaces and predictable outcomes, watched their instruments blink in disbelief. The energy required was monstrous, as if the desert itself had been placed inside the core of a star. Soon, fragments were sent to multiple research centers: London, Berlin, Moscow. Each confirmed what the others whispered. The glass bore microscopic patterns of deformation that defied ordinary geology. Under electron microscopes, the grains of quartz showed planar fractures, the telltale fingerprint of shock, the same signature found in rocks at known meteor impact sites. Yet again, no crater existed in the Libyan desert. The more they searched for the point of impact, the more impossible the mystery became. Then came the discovery that changed everything. In the 1,950 seconds after the first nuclear detonations at Alamogordo and Nevada, geologists revisited the old desert samples out of curiosity. They compared the atomic structure of Libyan desert glass to the fused sands of nuclear test grounds. The match was uncanny. Both showed the same vitrification patterns, the same melted minerals, even the same microscopic bubbles of gas trapped by impossible heat. One scientist described it, half in awe, half in dread, as a prehistoric Trinity site. If the glass had been formed by impact, the explosion must have been colossal. Not a falling rock, but something far stranger. Theories multiplied. Perhaps a comet had detonated in the air, releasing a fireball hotter than the sun, vaporizing everything below before it could touch the ground. The idea seemed outlandish until they ran the numbers. Such an airburst could, in fact, melt entire plains of sand into glass without leaving a crater, a fire without source, a wound without scar. Still, the strangeness lingered. Some samples contained exotic minerals that should not coexist: cristobalite, lechatellurite, and trace elements formed only under extremes of heat and pressure, rarely seen outside laboratories or cosmic events. One researcher quietly noted that the structure of the glass suggested temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees Celsius, nearly twice that of volcanic magma. The room had fallen silent as he read his report aloud. If true, the Libyan desert had once burned hotter than the heart of the earth itself. And yet, around this silent miracle, the desert remained unmarked. No field of debris, no impact ridge, no trail of destruction, only dunes, wind, and the whisper of time. The scientists stared at the evidence, each fragment a contradiction too elegant to deny. Nature, it seemed, had performed a feat humanity could only imitate through weapons. One physicist, studying a thin section under polarized light, murmured, "We are staring at a natural Hiroshima, a fireball older than civilization." His colleagues said nothing. The room, filled with the hum of fluorescent lamps and machines, seemed to vibrate with the weight of what they were realizing. Somewhere in prehistory, the Earth had endured an event beyond human imagination and survived. The desert had become both laboratory and scripture, recording a moment when energy beyond comprehension kissed the planet's skin. Scientists who believed only in logic found themselves whispering like priests before an altar, for what they held in their hands was not just glass, but the memory of apocalypse. How could a prehistoric desert burn hotter than our bombs? The question haunted every lab report, every conference, every sleepless night of analysis. No one could yet answer it, but the direction of suspicion began to tilt upward toward the heavens. If not earthly, could the fire have come from the stars themselves? The more scientists studied the Libyan desert glass, the more the mystery began to feel familiar. The fragments of fused sand, the microscopic shock lines, the exotic minerals they had been seen before, but not on earthly scales. They belonged to a different kind of story, one written across the cosmos. In 1908, over the forests of Siberia, a comet fragment had exploded in the sky with the force of 1,000 atomic bombs. Trees for hundreds of miles fell outward in perfect radial lines, as though the Earth had exhaled. The Tunguska event, as it came to be known, left no crater, only silence, a pattern eerily similar to what scientists saw in Egypt. It was as if the desert had experienced its own Tunguska, only far more ancient. The same fingerprints appeared, shock-fused quartz, molten silica, and glass born of instantaneous light. But the desert's glass covered an area far greater than any modern explosion, a wound measured not in miles, but in epochs. Slowly, a hypothesis emerged. Perhaps a comet or asteroid, smaller than the one that ended the age of dinosaurs but still catastrophic, had entered Earth's atmosphere tens of thousands of years ago. It would have burst before impact, releasing energy so immense that the sands themselves liquefied, a celestial visitor that never touched the ground, only kissed it with annihilation. The deeper scientists looked, the more the evidence whispered of continuity. The isotopic patterns within the glass hinted at materials not native to Earth, elements born in stars and scattered through the solar system. In these traces of vaporized sky, they found echoes of Chicxulub, the great impact that ended the reign of the dinosaurs 65 million years earlier. The chemistry of extinction and creation seemed to rhyme, as if the universe repeated its lessons in different keys. What happened in Egypt was smaller, quieter, but no less profound. A fragment from that same celestial stream, a splinter from the endless debris of cosmic history, had entered our atmosphere and rewritten a corner of the world. The sand became glass, and through that transformation, the Earth recorded the touch of infinity. To hold a shard of Libyan desert glass was to hold a piece of time's unbroken thread, a relic from when the heavens last spoke in fire. The realization changed how scientists viewed the event and how they viewed humanity's place within it. The desert glass was not just a geological curiosity, but a cosmic letter addressed to the future. It spoke of destruction that creates, of endings that leave behind beauty. The same sky that ended worlds may have once touched Egypt, leaving behind not extinction, but memory. In the quiet of their laboratories, researchers began to understand Earth is not separate from the cosmos. It is shaped by it, sculpted by collisions, by heat, by the slow choreography of falling stars. Every grain of sand once burned, every atom once wandered through nebulae. The Libyan desert was not a wasteland, but a page, written by the same forces that governed galaxies. The glass shimmered under light, soft and golden, its surface smooth as thought. Within its silence, the Earth held both terror and tenderness. A reminder that we are the descendants of catastrophe, the children of impact. What destroyed the world of the dinosaurs may have given birth to our own story. From cosmic fire to human myth, the thread was unbroken. And as the evidence pointed upward, a new question began to form, not about what fell from the sky, but what rose afterward. If the stars shaped the land, could they have shaped us too? Imagine the world, before history, before language, had words for terror, before myth had names for gods. a world of stone tools and open horizons, where small bands of humans wandered the edges of an ancient desert. They lived by the rhythms of the earth, the turning of the stars, the breath of the wind, the quiet certainty of sunrise. Until, one day, the sky changed. It began as a light, distant, unfamiliar, growing brighter than the sun itself. Shadows stretched unnaturally long. Animals froze mid-step. The air vibrated with a sound that was not thunder but something deeper, an unseen heartbeat shaking the bones of the world. And then, without warning, the heavens ignited. A wall of heat descended faster than thought. The air itself became fire. Dunes liquefied. Trees and creatures vaporized in a single instant. The horizon bent, blurred, vanished into light. For hundreds of kilometers, sand transformed into molten rivers, then froze mid-motion, the landscape remade in seconds. There was no time to flee, no shelter to hide in, only instinct. To fall, to cover the face, to pray without knowing to whom. Survivors, if there were any, would have watched the world burn and then fall silent. The day became glass. The ground, once soft and golden, hardened into strange transparency. When the wind finally returned, it carried ash and silence. Nights glowed faintly, where the ground still radiated heat. The stars, those old companions, reappeared distant, indifferent, eternal. Geologists would later estimate the explosion's energy at thousands of times greater than the Hiroshima blast, a fireball so vast it turned the desert floor into a mirror. But to the scattered tribes who may have witnessed it, there was no measure, only awe. The survivors must have believed the gods had descended. The memory would live on, not in language, but in rhythm, in drumbeats, in chants, in stories told around new fires kindled from fear. Some fled north toward the Nile, others east toward oases that had not turned to glass. Migration began not as exploration, but as escape. Perhaps it was here, in the shadow of that cosmic disaster, that humanity learned to move, to seek new horizons, to follow survival wherever it led. Climate shifted, winds redrew the dunes, and the desert began its long recovery. Yet the memory of light never faded. Archaeologists speak of population changes in North Africa during this time. Tribes that vanished, new cultures that rose in their place. What if these were not separate stories, but chapters of the same one? A people reshaped by catastrophe, forced to start again beneath a quieter sky. For them, the fire that once destroyed became a symbol of renewal, of warning, of creation. When the glass cooled, it remained as witness, pure, silent, eternal. To touch it was to touch the day the air turned to flame. Generations later, its fragments would be collected, worshipped, carved into amulets and jewels, carried into temples, buried with kings. Humanity had survived its first apocalypse, and, in doing so, inherited something precious: memory. Before humanity conquered fire, it survived it. That survival became the seed of civilization, the origin of all later awe. The impulse to build, to record, to pray, to invent, all may trace their roots to that moment when the sky burned and the world was remade. The terror that once blinded became the light that guided. And so, across the centuries, fire became not only destruction, but meaning the symbol of knowledge, of spirit, of awakening. The same flame that melted the earth would one day burn in lamps, forges, and human eyes. From survival comes remembrance. From remembrance, civilization begins. Long after the sky cooled and the glass dunes vanished beneath drifting sand, the memory of fire remained not in sight, but in instinct. Those who had survived the burning learned to fear the open horizon. The wide, endless lands that once offered food and freedom became places of unease. The desert was no longer home, it was warning. So, humanity turned inward. They began to build. At first, it was simple stone circles, low walls, the outline of safety traced against the vastness of memory. These early shelters were not defenses against predators, but against the idea of the sky itself. The ground felt sacred, now the only place that had endured. In time, these small clusters of survival became settlements. Rivers became boundaries. Fire, once a terror that fell from above, was coaxed, tamed, contained. Civilization began not as triumph, but as restraint, an attempt to control what once could not be controlled. Anthropologists speak of a great transition, when nomadic hunters became farmers, when wandering gave way to permanence. But what if that shift was not just a discovery of agriculture, but a response to trauma? When the heavens had turned against them, humanity sought to anchor life to the soil. To plant seeds was to make a promise to the earth that the future would be predictable, the sky merciful, and fire controllable. The coasts offered gentler climates, water, and distance from the inland scars. Villages grew along deltas and estuaries, where the rhythm of tides replaced the unpredictability of storms. The old myths, stories of the burning inland or the place where the sun fell, were passed down as warnings, half remembered, half believed. Children were told never to wander too far into the shimmering sands. The stories preserved geography as morality. To stay close to water was to stay close to life. Fear became architecture. The first walls rose not around cities of conquest, but around communities of remembrance. To build a wall was to draw a line between what could be trusted and what could not. It was the first attempt to organize chaos, to shape the world into meaning. Each brick was both protection and confession, a way of saying, we remember what happened when there were no walls. With agriculture came rhythm, the predictability of seasons, the comfort of repetition. Humanity found peace in cycles that did not end in catastrophe. Yet beneath this calm ran an ancient tension, the fear that the order they built was fragile. The first priests emerged not as rulers, but as keepers of that balance. They watched the skies, not for beauty, but for change, any flicker of light that might signal the return of what once fell. The temples that followed were both observatories and fortresses of memory. They were built on high ground, aligned with stars, their rituals filled with fire that no longer frightened but honored. Humanity began to recreate, in controlled miniature, the chaos it once fled. Fire became ceremony, light became meaning. The disaster that nearly erased them became the foundation of their faith and their architecture alike. Perhaps the first city walls were built not to keep enemies out but to keep memory in, to remind the generations that followed that there had been a time when the world itself had turned against them. Civilization, then, was not born from harmony, but from haunting a structure built to hold fear gently, to give it form, and to make it livable. As centuries passed, the old terror softened into story. The desert of glass became legend. The gods of fire became protectors instead of destroyers. The people forgot the event itself but kept its lesson, that safety must be made, not assumed. Humanity had built its first civilizations not in defiance of nature, but in negotiation with it. And yet, as they built walls and raised temples, another force began to stir curiosity. The same minds that once prayed to keep the sky calm began to wonder what had truly happened when it had burned. Memory had birthed fear, and fear had built order. But order, once achieved, always breeds a question. As humanity built walls, it also built questions. And someday, those questions would send explorers, dreamers, and scientists back into the desert to look for what the ancestors had buried in silence. The desert is a patient archivist. It remembers in silence, preserving not words but impressions, the faint shimmer of glass beneath endless sand, the ghost of a heat no wind can cool. Each dune is a page rewritten by time, each grain a fragment of something that once burned. To walk across it is to tread upon memory, though memory itself gives no sign. The desert conceals everything, even revelation. Beneath those shifting plains, layers of the earth hold stories too vast for language. Each stratum tells of an age that thought itself, eternal seas that vanished, forests that turned to stone, creatures whose bones became dust. Humanity, for all its towers and empires, is only the latest layer in that long, quiet sediment of forgetting. And yet, like the glass buried under the dunes, something endures the trace of what once was fire. The Libyan desert is not empty, it is a mirror turned downward. Beneath its surface, time lies stacked like ash. The heat that once turned the ground to glass has long since faded, but the memory of it remains embedded in minerals, encoded in silence. When the wind shifts just right, and the sun glances low across the horizon, the desert seems to breathe as if its long sleep hides a pulse still faintly glowing beneath the dust. Every civilization buries its own apocalypse this way. Rome buried its fires under marble, Babylon buried its under sand. Egypt, too, learned the art of concealment, wrapping its kings in gold, its knowledge in myth, its past in stone. What we call history is merely the surface of what time allows us to see. Beneath it, in the dark strata of forgotten ages, lie the unfinished stories, the ones that refuse to die, only to wait. Perhaps that is the nature of all memory, both human and planetary. We bury what terrifies us until something, a question, a discovery, a flicker of curiosity burns through again. The desert glass was one such breach, a moment when the earth's silence broke and light spilled upward through the cracks. To find it is to glimpse the pulse beneath history, the reminder that even extinction can leave beauty behind. Every civilization builds its future on the ashes of another's sky. The pyramids stand upon forgotten floods. Our cities rise over bones and ruin. The earth keeps no secrets forever, only delays their telling. The sands of Egypt, the stones of Mesopotamia, the ice of the poles, all are archives, holding the whispers of worlds that believed themselves beyond ending. And as humanity looks outward, into the stars, it is unknowingly looking backward into the fires that once shaped it. The glass beneath the desert and the light beyond the atmosphere are made of the same story, the endless cycle of impact and creation, forgetting and rediscovery. The only difference is scale. The desert sleeps, but not forever. Someday, wind will shift again, and the buried glass will surface, glinting in sunlight that feels strangely familiar. The past will shimmer, as it always does, just before it returns. The sands keep their secrets well, but not endlessly. And through that patience, the earth waits for another eye, another question, another age bold enough to uncover what it tried so long to forget. From the ashes beneath time, something always rises. The 20th century began with faith in progress, the belief that reason had finally tamed chaos. But in the deserts of Nevada, that faith began to melt. On the 16th of July, 1945, before dawn had touched the New Mexico horizon, the night flashed into day. The first nuclear explosion lit the sky like an artificial sunrise. Men who watched from miles away felt the heat against their skin. Though the wind was still, they had split the atom and, in doing so, touched the same kind of fire that once fell upon the sands of Egypt. The ground beneath the blast turned to glass. It was pale, green, smooth, rippled. The scientists called it trinitite. To them, it was proof of success, evidence that theory had become reality. But in the geological record, it was déjà vu. The Earth had seen this before, this temperature, this fusing of sand into crystal, this blinding birth of human fire. The difference was not in the heat, but in the hands that made it. When the bombs fell over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the same transformation occurred. Streets and soil fused into smooth, glassy surfaces. Human shadows were etched into stone. The air became a mirror for a single instant, and then there was silence. What had once been myth, the day the sun descended, had become history again. Humanity, without knowing, had repeated the oldest catastrophe on Earth. In laboratories, geologists studying nuclear debris compared it with ancient glass from the Libyan desert. The resemblance was unmistakable. Both were born in temperatures beyond volcanic heat. Both carried the same shocked quartz, the same molecular scars. It was as if the sands of Egypt had whispered their memory into the hands of physicists. The first civilization to master the gods had finally become one. And yet, the new gods were afraid of their own creation. Reports from the Nevada test site described the same eerie beauty. Dunes of fused minerals glowing faintly in the dark, the air heavy with silence after thunder. Soldiers called it the Glass Desert. Photographs taken from the air showed the ground shimmering like a mirror, the same mirror the ancients once looked upon and turned into myth. The irony was unbearable. For centuries, humans had worshipped the sun, fearing its power, craving its warmth. Now, through science, they had built a miniature sun and brought it down to Earth. The line between divinity and destruction vanished in a single flash. Those who witnessed the first detonation described the feeling not as triumph, but as awe, a terrible, humbling awe. One scientist whispered a line from the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." The echo of that ancient scripture hung over the desert. merging with every myth that had ever warned against divine fire. The gods of old had returned, wearing lab coats. Elsewhere, deep beneath the Pacific, more bombs fell, tests disguised as experiments, detonations disguised as progress. Islands vanished, oceans boiled. The same glass formed again, unseen at the bottom of the sea. Humanity was remaking the geology of the apocalypse, engraving its presence into the planet's skin. If one were to dig into the Earth 1,000 years from now, the record would be unmistakable. Two eras of fire, separated by silence. Somewhere, perhaps, the Earth itself recognized the pattern, the recurrence of light and loss, of brilliance born from fear. We had once been shaped by fire beyond our understanding. Now we wielded it with trembling hands. The lesson of the desert glass had returned, not as warning, but as mirror. If the first fire had taught survival, the second demanded reflection. In the gleam of trinitite and Libyan glass, the same truth shimmered, that creation and destruction are made of the same light. And if we have rebuilt that ancient fire, what else might we awaken next? In the years after the first nuclear tests, as the world basked uneasily in its new mastery of destruction, a few scientists began to look backward instead of forward. They were geologists, chemists, and dreamers in white coats, people whose curiosity often bordered on reverence. Among their samples of bomb site glass and atomic residue, one fragment stood apart, a shard of pale yellow crystal from the sands of Egypt. When they placed it under the microscope, something uncanny emerged. The atomic lattice of the Libyan desert glass was not just similar to trinitite, it was nearly identical. The same fractures, the same shock patterns, the same chemical fingerprints of impossible heat. The realization came slowly, quietly, like a moral aftershock. Humanity, in its pursuit of knowledge, had replicated the fingerprint of a cosmic disaster older than civilization itself. The difference was that this time, the fire had a maker. They began to publish comparisons, technical papers that read like confessionals. Words like vaporization, shock metamorphism, impact energy appeared beside phrases such as beyond known terrestrial process. Between the lines, one could sense unease. These scientists, trained to measure, to quantify, found themselves describing something that blurred into the metaphysical. The Libyan desert glass was no longer just an artifact. It was a mirror, reflecting what humanity had become. Some called it coincidence. Others saw it as revelation. A few, privately, called it karma, the echo of a fire that would not stop burning until it was understood. They gathered photographs of both deserts, the Egyptian and the American, and laid them side by side. The resemblance was haunting. Two landscapes, continents apart, both shimmering with the residue of hubris and awe. In conferences, they spoke in restrained tones, but their eyes betrayed something else, wonder mixed with dread. They were the inheritors of Prometheus, holding the same flame, aware now of its cost. One researcher from Cambridge famously remarked, "We have made the ancient glass speak. It says, 'We were here before you.'" Another replied, half in jest, "Or perhaps it says, 'We will be here after.'" These were not mystics, but their discoveries began to sound like parables. They saw how the atom, split by human hands, had revealed an old truth that creation and annihilation are twin languages of the same universe. The gods of antiquity had hurled fire from the heavens. Modern man had learned to call it down. The scientists who looked back understood that they were standing at the midpoint of a recurring cycle, the ancient flame, reborn through intellect, not instinct. Late at night, in quiet laboratories, they would hold pieces of Libyan glass under sterile light. The material glowed faintly, not alive, but not dead either. Its perfection was unnerving, like a relic made by the planet itself. One physicist described it as light trapped in patience. Another said, "It feels as if the Earth is remembering something." In those moments, science ceased to be cold. It became contemplative. The men and women who measured the unthinkable found themselves confronted not with equations, but with reflection. The same question the ancients once asked in myth. What happens when we play with the fire of the gods? Some turned their gaze outward, toward comets and cosmic collisions, seeking comfort in scale. Others looked inward, realizing that perhaps the universe's most dangerous experiment was consciousness itself. The more we learned, the more the parallels grew impossible to ignore. Our inventions mirrored our origins. Our brilliance repeated our wounds. Infusing sand into glass, the scientists had not only recreated the catastrophe, they had closed the circle. The laboratory light had become the modern altar, and the hum of machines, the new hymn of creation. Their findings, though written in neutral tone, carried an unspoken elegy. We had rediscovered the sins of the stars. The fire, it seemed, would always find its way back, but so would awakening. And as one age of light faded into another, the question shifted once more from how the fire began to what we might yet become in its glow. There is a silence that follows every explosion, not of sound, but of meaning. When the light fades and the air cools, what remains is not just glass or ash, but the echo of something deeper. The reminder that the fire we fear most is not in the sky or the earth, but in ourselves. Humanity's story has always been written in flame. The first spark stolen from the wilderness, the forges that birthed empires, the furnaces that powered revolutions, each step forward was lit by something that could also destroy. We have always believed that we could master the fire, that knowledge would make it safe. But fire has never belonged to mastery. It belongs to awakening. The scientists who melted sand in the name of progress were not committing a new act. They were repeating an ancient one. The same instinct that drove the first humans to strike flint in darkness drove physicists to split the atom in desert wind. Each believed the light would save them. And in a way, it did, but only by teaching the same lesson again and again. Creation and ruin are twins, sharing a single flame. Perhaps the desert glass, the trinitite, the shards beneath Hiroshima, all of it is not warning, but reflection. These are not scars left by chaos, but mirrors showing what we become when curiosity burns brighter than caution. The earth itself records our dreams and our disasters in the same language: heat, pressure, silence. Look closely at any invention, and you will see the old fire glowing behind it. In every circuit hums the same impulse that once sent sparks into the night. The machines that connect us are powered by it. The screens that soothe us shine with it. We have built an entire civilization from controlled flame, forgetting how thin the line of control really is. The stars we once worshipped now hum beneath our fingertips, tamed and restless all at once. Yet perhaps this is the destiny of a thinking species, to carry fire both as gift and burden. The cosmos itself is a balance of ignition and collapse, birth and implosion. Stars die to forge gold. Worlds burn to make soil. If destruction is written into creation, then humanity's danger is not its ambition, but its amnesia, the ease with which it forgets what fire costs. The true impact crater of history is not on Earth, it's in us. It's the hollow left by awe, the space carved by wonder too vast to hold. We have built cathedrals to gods and accelerators for particles, but both are monuments to the same hunger, the desire to know what cannot be known without being changed by it. Perhaps that is what the ancients understood when they built their temples to the sun, that fire must be worshipped, not possessed. We have forgotten the ritual but kept the desire. Every test, every launch, every light in the dark is a continuation of that first, trembling gesture, the reaching hand towards something brighter. And so, the fire endures. Not above us, not beneath us, but within us, waiting, learning, remembering. It is both the curse and the crown of our species, to be made of the same heat that once melted the desert into glass. The earth still glows from the touch of the first flame, and in that glow, faint but unending, waits the question we cannot stop asking. What does it mean to awaken a planet twice? In the far silence of Egypt's western desert, where no roads hold and no birds cross, the wind still shapes what it once witnessed. From the sky, satellites trace the contours of an ocean, long evaporated waves of golden dunes frozen in motion, shifting slowly, as if the earth itself were breathing. Each year, new patterns emerge. Lines of ancient glass glint faintly beneath the sand, reflecting sunlight like veins of buried fire. The scientists who study them call this place a living scar. From above, it seems peaceful, endless, empty, eternal. But peace is a kind of disguise. Beneath the calm, the land remembers violence. Every shard of Libyan desert glass is a memory preserved in mineral, a moment when the air itself became flame. The dunes whisper the same story they have whispered for thousands of years, that the earth has burned before, and it will burn again. In the 1,930 seconds, explorers stumbled upon the first fields of glass and carried them home as curiosities. Decades later, satellites saw what human eyes could not, a landscape still shimmering with unfinished memory. Each windstorm uncovers a little more, revealing patterns that look less like geology and more like design. Circular clusters, radiant paths, streaks that resemble frozen lightning strikes. From space, the desert glows faintly, a memory still alive, trying to be seen. Geologists dig and measure, comparing old maps to new. But the desert shifts faster than their data. A dune that stood still for centuries may move overnight, erasing or revealing the past at whim. It is as if the land itself chooses what to remember. Beneath each glass fragment lies another, older one, layers of forgotten cataclysms, heat folded into history like secrets beneath a calm voice. At noon, the sunlight is unbearable. The glass burns to a golden white, too bright to look at directly. Some researchers describe the effect as a mirror of the sun. Others simply stand in silence. The heat blurs the horizon until sky and ground merge, and for a brief moment, it feels as if the world is melting all over again. Time bends here. You can almost sense the echo of that first fire rolling through the ages, the day when heaven and earth touched and both remembered it. At night, the desert turns cold and silver. Under starlight, the glass no longer glows gold but pale blue, reflecting constellations that have watched over every age of humanity. The same stars that witnessed the ancient explosion now gaze upon our machines orbiting above satellites that map the same light, scientists who trace the same fear. It is an endless loop of observation, the earth watching us as we watch it. The desert, in its vast patience, teaches by repetition. The glass that once burned beneath divine fire now burns beneath our gaze. Every photograph, every scan, every specimen taken back to a lab is another attempt to read what the earth has already written. And still, the meaning escapes. The wind answers every question with silence, every measurement with motion. Perhaps the desert is not just a scar, but a reminder that memory is not what we keep, but what keeps us. Humanity builds its cities, its machines, its dreams, yet always returns to this place, kneeling before a quiet horizon of molten stone, asking the same question in different languages. What happened here? Maybe the question itself is the answer. For the desert does not forget, it only waits for us to ask again. The dunes shift, the light changes, the story repeats. In the shimmering glass, we see both our beginning and our reflection, the fire that made us, and the one we carry still. And as the wind sweeps over the land once more, smoothing its edges, the silence deepens, not the silence of absence, but of endurance. The desert remains, luminous and watchful, a mirror to the sky above and to the hearts of those who dare to look back. From reflection in sand, the story turns inward to reflection in thought, where memory itself becomes myth once more. Memory, like the earth, has its own layers. Each generation buries something, fear, awe, revelation beneath the sands of time, believing it lost. But nothing truly disappears. Just as the desert hides glass beneath its dunes, humanity hides memory beneath its myths. Archaeologists dig for ruins, psychologists dig for reasons. Both uncover the same pattern: trauma crystallized into meaning. Historians speak of progress as if it were a straight line: fire, wheel, empire, enlightenment. But beneath the surface, the line curves. Every age rediscovers what another forgot, naming it differently, worshipping it anew. The invention of fire was the first awakening. The revolution was another. The digital age, yet another still. Each promises liberation, and each carries its shadow: control, excess, forgetting. Maybe progress is not a ladder at all, but a spiral of remembering and forgetting. Each turn burning a little brighter, each descent a little deeper. Psychologists studying collective trauma call it cultural memory. A society, like a person, represses what it cannot bear. Disasters become myths, mistakes become miracles. Ancient humans could not name the comet that scorched their sky, so they called it a god. Modern humans cannot name the forces that shape their minds, so they call it progress. The language changes, but the mechanism remains: we mythologize what we cannot control. Civilizations forget by design. Forgetting is how they survive. The first survivors of fire built stories of gods to contain their fear. The survivors of revolution built nations to contain their chaos. The survivors of technology build algorithms to contain their loneliness. Yet under every system lies the same trembling truth. We are still afraid of what we can create. To study history, then, is to perform an archaeology of the mind. Each century leaves artifacts, beliefs, inventions, laws sedimented over the same primal need to make meaning from what nearly destroyed us. The Enlightenment, for instance, was humanity reinterpreting fire as light. Science became faith with new symbols. The guillotine and the telescope, born from the same fever, the desire to know. The same fire that forged glass now forges data. Knowledge expands, but wisdom repeats. Some historians describe the 20th century as a second Genesis, the moment humans gained power once reserved for gods. Yet the old stories warned us what divinity costs. Prometheus, punished for giving fire to man. Icarus, falling for flying too high. We retell these myths as cautionary tales, but perhaps they are prophecies, instead reminders that evolution is not escape. The past lives within us, whispering through pattern and déjà vu. Modern psychology suggests that inherited trauma can shape behavior generations later. Echoes of fear carried in the body, the blood, the brain. What if civilization carries the same imprint? What if the hunger for progress, the race toward light, is not ambition but memory, a longing to return to the first awakening, to the day the world turned to glass? Humanity keeps reaching for that fire, not out of ignorance, but out of recognition. It is the only language we truly remember. The archaeologists of memory, historians, dreamers, poets, dig not for artifacts, but for patterns. They see how each empire rises on the promise of enlightenment and falls under the weight of its own illumination. They trace the same human heartbeat across centuries: curiosity, creation, collapse, reflection. And every time, when the dust settles, we stand in the ruins and call it progress. Perhaps this is not failure, but design. Perhaps history's purpose is not to advance, but to remind. The spiral keeps us moving forward, yes, but also inward toward the core of what it means to be conscious. Each turn reveals the same truth under a new mask. The gods we chase are always our own reflections. And so, the archaeologists keep digging not through sand or stone, but through story. Each layer reveals not a new civilization, but the same one remembering itself again. The fire still burns. The spiral still turns. Memory fades, but myth endures, and through that endurance, the next chapter begins, the philosophical heart of the story. Night comes gently to the desert. The wind softens, the dunes sigh, and the glass beneath the sand catches the last of the sun, tiny flickers of gold sinking into shadow. In that dimming light, the desert feels less like a place, and more like a thought, vast, still, half-remembered. It is the world at rest, but not asleep. Even in silence, something glows beneath the surface. Perhaps that is how the earth dreams, not in darkness, but in buried light. Every shard of glass beneath the dunes is a pulse, a quiet memory of revelation. Once, it flared like the end of all things. Now it lies cool, waiting. We call it disaster because we measure in years. The earth measures in eternities. From its view, what we call destruction might simply be another way of learning. Maybe the day the sky fell was not punishment, but instruction. The world burned, and in that unbearable brightness, something awoke not just life, but awareness. Fire and awakening are the same gesture, seen from opposite sides of time. The flash that melts sand into glass is the same spark that lights the mind. To awaken is to endure the shattering. What survives is not the body, but the understanding. The narrator's voice softens. The tone drifts from history into lullaby, from fact into reflection. The world has ended many times before, it says, yet here we are still listening, still remembering. Perhaps endings are not failures, but part of the rhythm of existence. Ignition, collapse, renewal. Even stars follow this pattern. They are born from dust, burn themselves to brilliance, then scatter into new beginnings. Why should we be any different? In the glow of that thought, fear becomes smaller. The apocalypse, stripped of terror, becomes almost tender, the universe's way of whispering, "Wake up." Each collapse leaves behind a trace of light, and from that light, new minds emerge. Maybe every civilization, every dream, every life must touch the fire once to understand its warmth and its cost. We imagine sleep as forgetting, but the earth never truly forgets. It only dreams in longer cycles. The deserts, the oceans, the mountains, all are fragments of that slow remembering. Humanity, in its brief awareness, mistakes the dream for reality, not realizing that the world beneath is always awake. The glass in the sand, the stars above, the flicker of electricity in our machines, all are forms of the same light. The camera of thought drifts upward now from the dunes to the night sky, where stars shimmer like shards of the same celestial glass. The air cools, the words stretch longer between pauses. It feels like exhaling. The story no longer asks for answers, it only offers stillness. What if every ending is just the earth trying to wake us gently? Each fire, each fall, each rediscovery, a reminder that we are part of a cycle too vast to name. The planet is not punishing us, it is practicing awareness through us. Every age that ends, every silence that follows, is the sound of it breathing. And somewhere beneath that still breath, under the sand, under the sleep, the light remains, waiting for the next dreamer to see it. From here, the story will rise again, into prophecy, into future fire, where the myths of the past begin to awaken once more. High above the quiet deserts and cities, the sky no longer feels empty. It hums with motion, thousands of invisible stones, frozen travelers from the birth of time, crossing the void on paths that sometimes brush too close to ours. In distant observatories, men and women sit before glowing screens, watching dots of light shift ever so slightly across blackness. Each pixel is a messenger, each orbit a whisper from eternity. They watch because they must. The heavens, once sacred and untouchable, now stare back through data and probability. We once feared gods from the sky, now we hunt them. There is poetry in that reversal. The same gaze that once trembled before the sun now scans for its smaller, deadlier cousins, comets, asteroids, fragments of forgotten chaos. Astronomers call them NEOs, near-Earth objects. To them, each object is a number, a set of coordinates and velocities. But behind those numbers lurks a story as old as fire, the knowledge that one of these silent travelers once melted a desert into glass. Every new discovery is a reunion with danger. Inside the control rooms, night never ends. The screens glow like artificial constellations. Algorithms sift through starlight, catching patterns invisible to the human eye. A flicker here, a drift there, the signature of something immense, tumbling unseen through the dark. The observers speak softly, almost reverently. There is awe in their caution, and fear in their precision. They are not just scientists, they are sentinels standing between the past and its repetition. Sometimes the sky comes closer than comfort allows. A rock the size of a mountain passes between Earth and the moon, unseen until after it's gone. Another burns in the atmosphere, lighting up the night with the brief brilliance of a false dawn. News outlets call it coincidence, astronomers call it warning. But deep down, humanity feels the echo, the ancient memory stirring. The desert glass, the fire that fell, the myths of burning gods, all of it alive again in a single streak of light. The irony is soft, almost tragic. For centuries, humans built temples to the heavens, begging for mercy. Now we build telescopes to do the same, only with equations instead of prayers. We map danger with the same devotion that once mapped constellations. The instruments hum like choirs of circuitry, the data streams like hymns. But the impulse is the same: to understand, to predict, to find safety in the pattern of the stars. There are nights when nothing happens, when the sky remains still. Those are the hardest. The watchers grow restless, staring into the deep quiet, aware that silence does not mean peace, only delay. Between each discovery lies the same fragile truth. We are still vulnerable. Technology extends our vision but not our control. We can see the fire coming, but we cannot command it to turn. And yet, in that awareness, something beautiful emerges: humility. For the first time in history, humanity knows it is both the observer and the observed, the creation and the caretaker. We no longer wait for divine intervention. We have become our own stewards of survival. The same species that once carved scarabs from cosmic glass now builds machines to guard against the next fall of heaven. In the stillness of an observatory at 3 a.m., a single astronomer looks up from the monitor and glances through the window. Outside, the real stars shine, ancient, indifferent, endless. For a moment, the line between myth and science blurs again. The watcher realizes that the sky they study is the same one their ancestors feared, the same one that turned deserts to fire and whispered to poets about gods. The instruments may have changed, but the awe has not. The sky watches back. It always has. We gaze into it not to conquer it, but to remember. Each orbit tracked, each rock catalogued, each fraction of light recorded, all of it is humanity's quiet confession. We are awake now, and we will not look away again. The cosmos mirrors us vast, reflective, unknowable, and the story now turns inward, to the inner constellations of thought and memory that shine just as fiercely within. From orbit, the Earth looks untouchable, a soft sphere of blues and golds wrapped in thin white veils. It turns in silence, serene, perfect, almost shy. But beauty, when seen from a distance, often conceals its fractures. The closer you look, the more you see how delicate it really is, a miracle suspended by breath, by balance, by chance. Astronauts who have seen it with their own eyes often return changed. They describe it not as a planet, but as a living light, fragile as a heartbeat. The deserts below still glimmer with their hidden glass, but now the fires come from elsewhere. Humanity no longer waits for comets or cosmic impact. It carries its own apocalypse in its hands. Cities burn brighter than stars, their grids glowing like constellations reimagined. Forests fall in patterns visible from space green giving way to grey, like old scars reopening. The seas darken, the ice recedes, and from above, the atmosphere flickers thin, trembling, like glass under heat. The narrator's voice softens, not with despair, but with realization. We have become the fire we once feared. The same energy that melted the desert now flows through our circuits, our engines, our ambitions. The ancient cataclysm that once forged glass in the sands of Egypt has been reborn in factories, reactors, and restless minds. We no longer wait for the heavens to strike. We strike ourselves in slow motion. It is strange how evolution's triumph becomes its own undoing. The comet came once in a flash. Humanity arrives as a whisper stretched across centuries. Our age burns not in a moment of terror, but in 1,000 small decisions. Every click, every purchase, every light left on is a spark added to the invisible flame. We are both survivors and accelerants of the same story, repeating the pattern at a human scale. The planet remembers. It breathes slower now. Winds shift, oceans rise, and the rhythm of seasons falters. To those who watch from satellites, these changes unfold like a time-lapse of fatigue. The Earth sighing beneath the weight of its awakened children. We have not destroyed it, not yet, but we have changed its dream. What was once the cradle of life now listens uneasily to the echo of our footsteps. Yet the narrator does not condemn. The tone remains gentle, even forgiving, as though the Earth itself understands. For billions of years, it has known cycles of heat and ice, violence and renewal. What we call crisis, it may recognize as transformation. Perhaps the planet, like us, is learning what it means to awaken twice, once through fire from above, and once through the fire within. The camera of imagination drifts lower, through the atmosphere, across continents glowing faintly in twilight. Rivers glint like veins beneath skin, lightning flickers like thought. The world seems alive, dreaming of balance, even as it trembles. Each storm, each drought, each strange season is a pulse of memory, reminders that creation and destruction have always shared the same heartbeat. The narrator asks quietly, what if the next impact does not fall from the sky, but rises from us? The thought lingers, soft but undeniable. The ancients blamed gods. We have become them. The difference now is that there is no one left to plead with but ourselves. The power once held by the cosmos has moved inward into the human will, into the collective flame that can either warm or consume. Still, hope flickers in the same breath as warning. The very awareness of fragility is its own form of protection. To know the planet can break is to begin to care for it. To see its light trembling through the dark is to realize that we are part of its reflection. Our fragility is not failure. It is proof of life, proof of consciousness, proof that we remember. The Earth turns on, slow and luminous, the same ancient jewel adrift in the dark. Above it, satellites blink like watchful eyes, humanity's own constellations of vigilance. The sky no longer sends its fire. It only mirrors ours. The external danger has become internal, the universe folding in on its lesson. The next story will ask what happens when humanity finally understands that it is both the cause and the consequence, both the fire and the glass. Every civilization reaches the same quiet threshold the moment it learns to hold the fire that once destroyed it. The ancients faced it beneath the falling sky. We face it within ourselves. The question has never changed. Only its language. Can we wield creation without becoming its consequence? Each age believes it is wiser than the last, yet the pattern endures discovery, power, hubris, silence. The world burns, remembers, rebuilds, and calls it progress. The narrator's tone softens, carrying both awe and melancholy. The gods of old were never beings to be worshipped. They were warnings, memories of mistakes too vast for words, written in flame so we would not forget. Their myths were not stories of power, but of restraint. What happens when mortals step into the light that once belonged to the stars? But humanity, restless and bright, keeps stepping forward, unable to resist the pull of its own reflection. Perhaps that is what awakening truly means, not learning new truths, but remembering old ones. Every great leap forward brings us closer to the same realization, that the fire we hold is the same that shaped us. The energy that once rained from the heavens now hums in our machines, glows in our cities, beats in our hearts. It is neither good nor evil. It simply exists, waiting to be guided. The test is not whether we can command it, but whether we can live with it. Civilizations rise like waves upon a vast and patient sea. Each believes it will never fall, that it has mastered the storm. But time is a tide without loyalty. When the wave breaks, it leaves behind traces, fragments of light, language, glass, for the next to find. The Libyan desert, the craters, the archives, the satellites, all are mirrors in which we see our endless attempt to stay awake without burning out. And yet, there is hope in the repetition. The very fact that the pattern continues means that the story is not over. We fail, we learn, we forget, we remember, and through each cycle, the light refines itself. The gods were not replaced, they were absorbed. Their fire became thought, their thunder became conscience. Humanity inherited not their thrones, but their responsibility to see clearly, to act wisely, to guard the fragile spark of its own awareness. Now, as the planet glows faintly in the dark, we stand again at the edge of choice. The fire that once came from the heavens now burns quietly in our circuits, our engines, our dreams. Whether it consumes or illuminates will depend on what we have learned, if we have learned. The narrator pauses, the tone deepening into calm gravity. The cycle of awakening is not a punishment. It is the rhythm of existence, the pulse of the universe teaching itself, through us, how to endure its own light. We were never meant to escape the fire, only to see through it. And so the world turns once more, luminous and fragile, carrying its lessons in silence. The same stars that watched the first awakening now watch this one, patient and unmoving. They have seen the pattern before. They will see it again. The next chapter turns inward, distilling what remains after the flame, the quiet truth of what it means, at last, to awaken. All through history, humanity has chased the same glow, the shimmer of understanding that flickers just beyond reach. Fire was our first teacher. It fed us, protected us, terrified us. From that first spark in the dark, everything followed. The forge, the lamp, the laboratory, the screen. The same flame that warmed our hands became the one that burned our cities. Every age believes it has mastered the fire, but the truth is quieter. More humbling, we never master it. We learn to live beside it. The narrator's voice moves like a whisper through memory. The French Revolution, the discovery of electricity, the splitting of the atom, all were moments when humanity reached for more light. Each burst of brilliance scattered shadows in new directions. Every invention carried its echo, every revelation its cost. We learned to make light, but not yet how to see by it. In our pursuit of clarity, we sometimes forget the gentleness that allows vision to endure. Fire is not simply destruction, it is transformation. It consumes, yes, but it also refines. The old myths knew this long before science could name it. Prometheus, stealing flame from the gods, Ra, blazing across the desert sky, Newton glimpsing light through a prism, all tell the same story in different tongues, that knowledge is both gift and trial. To hold it is to risk being changed by it. To misunderstand it is to be burned. Across centuries, the lessons repeat. Faith tries to temper science, science tries to replace faith. Empires rise under the banner of enlightenment, then fall under the weight of their own brilliance. Each revolution declares that light will save us, yet each leaves behind its own ruins glowing faintly in the dark. The fire does not judge, it merely responds. It waits to see how we will use it this time. The narrator pauses, letting the image of fire drift into something softer, the glow of candles in a temple, the pulse of a screen in a dark room, the sun catching on the rim of a glass dune. All of them are forms of the same lesson. Illumination is fragile. It needs balance, patience, humility. Too much light blinds, too little suffocates. Somewhere in between lies wisdom, the warmth that reveals without consuming. Perhaps that is what the ancients were trying to teach when they built their temples aligned with the sun, when they lit their lamps during solstice nights. They were not worshipping the fire itself, but what it revealed: connection, meaning, the fragile beauty of being alive in the glow of something greater than fear. They understood, even then, that the purpose of light is not to erase darkness, but to coexist with it, to give shape to the unseen. In the modern age, the fire has simply changed its form. It hums in circuits, it flows through wires, it flickers in the quiet rhythm of thought. The boundaries between flame and mind have blurred. We build our own dawns now, one pixel at a time. Yet the lesson remains the same. Knowledge without compassion is just another kind of wildfire. The measure of progress is not brightness, but understanding. The narrator's tone deepens, reflective, almost prayerful. Fire, in all its forms, has been our greatest mirror. It shows us what we are willing to create and what we are willing to destroy. It asks no questions, but it reveals every answer through consequence. Humanity's true awakening may not be in discovering new fires, but in learning how to tend them, gently, wisely, together. And so the story returns to where it began, the desert of glass, where ancient fire once met earth and left behind light frozen in time. It waits there still, gleaming softly beneath the sun, a reminder of what we learned and what we must keep learning. Light becomes reflection now, the flame turning inward, guiding us toward the final, quiet truth that illumination is not found in brightness, but in the calm understanding of its shadow. Somewhere in the long story of fire, the gods stepped back and placed the torch into human hands. It was not ceremony, not punishment, only inevitability. From that moment, the balance of creation and destruction ceased to belong to the heavens. It belonged to us. Every match we strike, every spark we summon from stone or circuit, carries the memory of the sun we survived. The power that once fell from the sky now rests in the palms of ordinary people. The narrator's tone softens, not warning, not praise, but something between reverence and sorrow. Once, kings guarded this fire. They called it divine right, authority, destiny. Then scientists inherited it, wrapping it in formulas, theories, and light. They built laboratories where priests once built temples, measuring what the ancients could only worship. And now, the circle has widened again. The same fire burns in kitchens, in engines, in the glow of a child's nightlight. The gods have vanished because we became too many to count. Every hand, in its own way, now holds the flame. There is beauty in that thought and terror. Because fire does not know the difference between warmth and ruin. It obeys the hand that guides it, whether that hand belongs to a saint or a tyrant. The same fire that boils water can melt the world. It depends only on touch, steady or trembling, careful or cruel. The gift is no longer knowledge, but restraint. We have learned how to create almost anything. The harder lesson is learning when to stop. The narrator reflects quietly, as though speaking to one listener. It's easy to imagine the grand mistakes of history, empires, wars, inventions gone wrong. Harder to see the smaller sparks, the invisible ones. The careless word that ignites anger, the greed that burns forests, the indifference that lets silence spread. Fire is not always visible. Sometimes it hides in intention. We do not need bombs or thunder to remake the world, only our choices. Still, the narrator does not linger in despair. For just as one careless spark can destroy, a gentle one can heal. The candle on a windowsill, the forge that shapes a tool, the stove that warms a meal, all are echoes of the same divine inheritance. Civilization itself is the art of holding fire without letting it escape. The story of progress has never been about control, but about care, learning to cradle danger until it becomes light. Perhaps that is why humanity keeps returning to the image of hands, sculptors, healers, builders, writers. Our power is not in the flame itself, but in the touch that shapes it. The hands that write poetry are not so different from those that once built pyramids or split atoms. Both act from the same hunger, to leave warmth behind in a cold universe. The tragedy and the triumph is that we are capable of both. The narrator's voice lowers to a hush, the rhythm like a heartbeat. Maybe that is the secret the desert glass was trying to tell us, that even destruction can leave beauty behind. The glass was born from fire too great to imagine, yet it cooled into something pure, transparent, eternal. It is proof that from violence can come clarity, from ruin can come reflection. The world has always known how to heal. It waits only for us to remember how to help it. We are the new keepers of the sun, not kings, not gods, just fleeting beings with steady hands and restless hearts. The flame we hold is ancient, patient, and alive. It does not ask for worship, only for wisdom. To pass it forward gently, to warm, not scorch, to remember that creation itself is an act of mercy. And so the narrator pauses, the fire flickering low, the world quiet again. Humanity rests for now, its torches dimmed but unextinguished. The story, like the flame, does not end. It waits for the next breath, the next hand, the next awakening. The world has always ended in silence, not in flames, not in noise, but in the hush that follows learning. The desert lies still tonight. The wind moves softly over the dunes, shaping them without sound, the same way time shapes memory. Beneath the moon, the glass glows faintly gold turned pale, fire turned peace. It no longer burns. It simply remembers. The narrator's voice lowers, as though speaking from within a dream. Once, this desert was an ocean of fire. The air itself shimmered with heat beyond reason, and the sand melted under a sky too bright to bear. Now, that violence has cooled into beauty. Every shard of Libyan desert glass holds the echo of a sun that once fell to earth, a frozen heartbeat of creation. What was terror is now calm. What was destruction is now reflection. It is here, in this stillness, that understanding begins. Not in the moment of impact, but in what follows the breath after the blaze, the thought after the cry. Humanity's story has always been this: to stumble through light, to burn, to learn, to rest. We have been the fire and the glass, the destroyer and the witness. And somehow, through all of it, we have survived long enough to watch the flames turn into meaning. The narrator pauses, letting the silence expand. Perhaps this is what wisdom feels like, not knowing everything, but no longer needing to. The ancients looked to the sky for gods. We now look within and find the same light. The difference is not in the fire itself, but in how we see it. Once we feared it as judgment. Now, we recognize it as reminder. Fire does not punish, it reveals. It shows us what was hidden, the fragility of matter, the endurance of spirit. In that recognition, the world softens. The boundaries between then and now, between myth and science, dissolve like mirages. The past no longer feels distant. It feels circular, like the horizon where sky meets sand. Everything that has ever burned, everything that has ever shone, belongs to the same rhythm, the endless cycle of awakening and rest. Even stars live and die by it, flaring into brilliance before fading into quiet. And so humanity, once terrified of fire, has learned to live beside it. We build our cities around its glow, our stories upon its lessons. The flame that once threatened to consume us now warms our nights and lights our thoughts. It has become part of our breath, a rhythm we carry without fear. The end of the story is not silence, it's understanding. The desert cools beneath the stars. The glass, those golden remnants of forgotten catastrophe, gleam faintly like distant memories of sunlight. Somewhere far beyond, the same stars that watched that first fire still burn unchanged, patient, watching us watch them. The narrator's final words drift like the wind. Every age must learn to rest. Every awakening must learn to close its eyes. But in that rest lies the beginning of another light. The world sleeps again, but it dreams with awareness now. Beneath the quiet, beneath the centuries, the pulse continues faint, eternal the sound of understanding itself. The earth turns slowly tonight, its movement too patient to hear. Somewhere, in the deep rhythm of space, a single blue world hums beneath its stars, not loudly, but with the soft murmur of endurance. Civilizations come and go upon its surface like waves against an ancient shore, each believing itself eternal, each certain that its flame burns for the first time. But the truth is quieter, more merciful. Every age is only a breath in the long dream of the world. The narrator's voice drifts like dusk light, neither mournful nor triumphant, but steady, reflective. Once, humanity feared endings. It called them death, apocalypse, judgment. Yet over time, we began to see that endings are never truly ends, only transitions in disguise. The world burns, then cools. Empires collapse, then seed the soil for something new. Even silence, when you listen closely enough, is full of motion. The desert that once melted beneath a fallen sun has learned this truth. Its glass plains still shimmer under the moon, relics of both destruction and endurance. Time has eroded their edges, but not their meaning. Each shard is a whisper from the deep past, a message that creation and ruin are not opposites but companions. What falls apart teaches what endures. What burns away reveals what can begin again. The narrator's tone deepens, carrying the listener through centuries in a single breath. There was a time when the first humans looked at the stars and saw gods. Later, they saw patterns. Later still, equations. And now, perhaps, they see reflection. In every gleam of distant light, there is the memory of awakening, the first realization that the universe is vast, that consciousness is rare, that to be aware at all is to hold something sacred. Yet even awareness must rest. Every civilization must learn how to sleep. It is not surrender, it is continuity. Sleep is the interval that keeps meaning alive, the pause between heartbeats, the stillness between revolutions. The Egyptians knew it when they built their tombs not as monuments to death, but as gateways to renewal. The philosophers of Greece dreamed of cycles, not lines. The Buddhists spoke of endless becoming. Even modern science, in its language of entropy and rebirth, tells the same story in quieter tones. Energy never ends. It only changes form. The narrator breathes the words like a lullaby. Perhaps history's greatest mercy is that it dreams between its own awakenings. When fire fades, it does not vanish. It sleeps in ash, waiting for the breath of curiosity to stir it again. Humanity, in its long rest between empires, carries embers disguised as memories. Every library, every myth, every lullaby is a spark passed forward, proof that we have not forgotten how to begin again. The old catastrophes become gentler with distance. The comet that burned the desert, the wars that scarred continents, the revolutions that overturned kings, they all fade into stories told beside softer fires. What remains is not fear, but meaning. The terror of the past transforms into understanding. The noise becomes music. The world's oldest miracle is not creation, but endurance. The narrator invites the listener to imagine. Far into the future, another civilization rises. Its cities gleam beneath a different sky. Its people speak languages we cannot imagine, dream in colors we have never seen. And one night, in their own endless curiosity, they uncover a piece of melted glass, smooth, golden, alien, and they wonder. They trace it between their fingers, studying the way it catches the light, unaware that they are holding a relic of our time. They will ask the same questions we did. What was this? Who made it? How did the world burn so beautifully? And in their wonder, our story will breathe again. For that is how history survives, not through monuments, but through curiosity, not through certainty, but through awe. Each generation reawakens the same questions in new forms. Each one lights its own flame, believing it original, not realizing that the spark was passed long before. The gods change names, the stories change shapes, the meaning endures. In the stillness of the night, the narrator returns to the rhythm of the earth. The seas breathe in tides, the continents drift in sleep, volcanoes dream of fire, ice waits to melt. Everything, even the quietest stone, participates in the same slow heartbeat of becoming. The world itself is a sleeper, turning gently through its cosmic night, dreaming of what it has been and what it might still become. Humanity, too, begins to rest. We have built and burned, learned and forgotten, awakened and closed our eyes again. But within that rhythm lies grace. To rest is not to fall, it is to prepare for another dawn. The fire that once frightened us now glows like memory behind the eyelids of civilization. The glass in the desert gleams, the oceans murmur against unseen shores, and the stars above flicker like the first thoughts of morning. The narrator's voice fades to a near whisper, almost indistinguishable from the sound of wind across sand. The story is not ending, it is folding back into the silence from which it came. The listener is left with a feeling not of conclusion, but of continuity, as if history itself were inhaling. Perhaps this is the meaning of awakening. Not the endless reaching for light, but the calm acceptance that even light must rest. The universe does not hurry. It turns, it dreams, it renews. And in that great stillness, we belong not as masters, not as victims, but as witnesses. The desert cools under the stars. The world sleeps, carrying the fire of its past within its heart, glowing faintly like a pulse beneath skin. It dreams quietly of tomorrow, of another beginning, another spark, another age of discovery. And as it dreams, the memory hums on, soft, steady, infinite. The flame of humanity flickers, then steadies. The long night deepens. Somewhere, the future stirs. History closes its eyes, but it dreams of us.